Hey everyone, Cell here, and in today's video I'll be talking about the new-ish Reliquarian class coming with 328, the Mirage League update, and I guess I'll start off by saying if you're not familiar with the Freesia classes or didn't play the event, this is equivalent to the Scavenger class, what was called the Scavenger class in Freesia. There was another class called Reliquarian, so they're using that name for this new class in the base game. And essentially what it is a new Scion Ascendancy. So you'll be able to choose Ascendant or Reliquarian when you play a Scion now. And the Ascendancy notables, instead of classes, like watered down class nodes from other Ascendancies as you would have in Ascendant, you get similarly watered down-ish, a little less watered down than the classes on Ascendant, unique items. So as we can see here, first node has a selection of various armor items available to choose, and there are several other of these nodes at this point in the game, but you'll see that there's one big node here and a little few small nodes around that. And whenever you see that in a class, that means you get to pick one of these things, and you can respec them without respecing the whole series of things behind. Like, you already have the nodes back here, or have a node back here that you picked, and you want to change this front one. You don't have to respec the whole thing. You unspec this point, which will be one of these 5 smaller ones, and can then again specialize into one of those 5. So I suppose I'll go over the general stuff without mentioning anything too specific. I will, show each set of options here briefly if you want to pause and look at them yourself, but otherwise I won't go over every individual item. As I said, this first node here is armor items. So we have a couple body armors, a helmet, a shield, and boots that we're pulling properties from. The one on the bottom here is PoE 2. Well, no, they wouldn't, I guess. These are attack-based nodes for the most part. So the aim is to probably use this on an attack-based build. The top side is opposite of that, which is spell-based items. So you'll use this if you want to use spells or have other means of scaling spells, for example, or scaling with spell-based modifiers. An example of that would be in Freesia, one of these nodes was Void Battery, which gives you spell damage for power charge and an extra power charge, and that was used for an attack-based build, the Locust Mines, because you're scaling power charges and the wand skills get increased damage at a greater rate from spell damage, so that worked for an attack-based build in that case. And then the last one here is jewelry, a couple rings, a belt, and a couple amulets. And yeah, there's some interesting stuff here for sure. So we'll take a look at this, but one thing to note before that is the structure and spacing of the nodes themselves. So each labyrinth you run, you're going to get 2 ascendancy points, same as always, for a total of 8. And what that means is your first lab, these minor nodes are 1 passive skill point each. So when you run your first labyrinth, you'll get 2 passive skill points. That is significantly worse than pretty much anything else in the game, unless you're playing one of the bottom tier classes, and even then, your worst 2 points are probably better than 2 passives at that point in the game. So yeah, first labyrinth, you get functionally very little. Second labyrinth, you get to pick up your first node here. And none of them still are at the level of power spiking that other Ascendancy classes would have, especially having 4 points. So you have one of your major nodes out of 3 at a point where other classes would have 2 of their 4. So you're up to here. You've got a 3rd passive skill point at this point. And your 3rd labyrinth, you'll get to pick up your 2nd Ascendancy item notable from either the attack-based or the spell-based section here. And then once you run your last labyrinth, you can pick up a piece of jewelry. So important thing to note here is that you can't, not that this would be super common to do, take a bottom node and a top node. You can only take left, top, right, or left, bottom, right, or you can forego the right node if you wanted to in order to use a bloodline ascendancy. Probably not really recommended because, again, you're giving up a third of what your class offers rather than a fourth that you would playing another ascendancy, which ends up kind of being the crux of this whole thing. Now, I'm not in the camp that thinks that's a super massive deal, and for one reason. Most people do not understand the value of passive points in the late game. For a lot of builds, if we're thinking from a pure damage perspective, a lot of builds have nodes they can spend extra passive points on even once they've hit 100 or whatever level you're sticking at, whatever it might be. Each passive point in the endgame for most builds is worth somewhere between 3 and 5% damage. If we call that an average of 4%, which is, again, pretty achievable for many builds, even more so if your build is starved for certain stats that you have easy access to with passive points, that would mean the 5 passive points that you're getting from your class are worth about 20% more damage. Because again, this is you're in POB and checking a node, and POB is telling you plus 4.2% damage or whatever. That is 4.2% over what you currently have, and not like, oh, 10% increased damage, but it's super watered down. No, that's post all the calculations. 5 points is going to be worth, generally speaking, like 16 to 24% more damage. So that's really good. And certainly worth keeping in mind, but that kind of goes along with what I'm about to say next, and there's going to be some build up here. So there are a few things that this type of class, same with Scavenger in the Freesia event, and same now, and going forward, they're going to change the items available every league. So you want to kind of reevaluate which thing about the class is strong as a general concept before deciding to make a build about it. Now, that could be a handful of things. One, in solo self-found, which is the context in which I'm talking about this, because I'm a solo self-found player, the access to items is one of the more important parts. If there's a rare unique that you otherwise wouldn't have a good chance of getting during the course of your normal run, or whatever it might be, however long you might play, then being able to get the power that you want from that item from your Ascendancy class can be very strong. And that was such the case with Void Battery in the Freesia event, for example. Very powerful effect, power charge scaling, typically very strong, especially in the Locust Mine build back then. So it was a very easy way to acquire that power. Similarly, in the Freesia event, there was Cloak of Flame. Cloak of Flame, while not necessarily the most common item, or least common item, you can find it pretty commonly, all things considered, it occupies the body armor slot, which is maybe not something you want to give up for the fizz to fire damage taken conversion. So that kind of bleeds into my next point. Beyond item acquisition would be the cost of equipping that item for the effect that you want. I just mentioned Cloak of Flame, taking up a body armor slot. There are some weapon effects that you really don't want to use the weapon for because the weapon is otherwise bad or less good than alternatives. So that's another point to consider. And those are what I would say should be the two main points of consideration in solo self-found. Accessibility, cost of equipment slot. There's also the uniqueness of the effect. So, for example, one of the jewelry options here is Astromentus. It's a lot of stats, but you can get a lot of attributes in a lot of places, really. So 60 to all attributes may not be worth somewhere between a third and a fourth of your Ascendancy. It just kind of depends on the build. And that said, I do think Astromentus is one of the better options here. Now, the offerings this time around, in my opinion, don't really fit either of those main criteria that I went over. There's not anything here that really calls out as being so unique that it is something you absolutely want to go for, try to fit on your build, because you're going to have no chance of finding that. With a couple of exceptions, Astral Projector is pretty rare. So if you want to play a build using Astral Projector, then yeah, this is a potential option for that. The obvious build to play here, so to speak, would be you take Victario's Influence for +2 aura skill gems, for Pyroclast Mines, which is an aura, because mines have an aura effect on them. So +2 to your main skill, with some reservation efficiency and aura area of effect as well. Then up top here, you take Skills Fire 2 additional projectiles. It has no downside for Pyroclast Mines because projectiles already don't continue because they're ground targeted. And then this last node here, you would take Astral Projector. People typically like playing Pyroclast Mines with Astral Projector. Now, sometimes there's going to be some synergy like that where, things line up and the nodes themselves are good enough starter capable. Again, there's some drawbacks. You can have a slower start, slower ramping up than other classes because of the inherently delayed power because of how the class is broken up and the nodes are spaced apart. But that is something to consider. But for the most part, this is a late game Ascendancy class. And I say that because, the true power of the nodes here comes not from what's on the nodes themselves entirely, but the other items that they allow you to equip. So, for example, going back to the Astral Projector node, say your build really wants or needs an Astral Projector to function or feel good. That means you're giving up a ring slot, which the ring isn't very good, apart from the unique property of altering Nova spells. And so by taking that node, you free up a ring slot, and if you're wearing a mirrored ring or a mirror-worthy ring, that could be insane. Your Ascendancy node is then equivalent to a mirror-worthy ring. Likewise, there are other items that you might want here. For example, Burden of Shadows gives you life scaling into damage, chaos damage. And if that's something you're focusing on and want to create your build around, then you don't have to wear a Burden of Shadows or do any other kind of funky life chaos scaling now, or you can in addition to this, depends on the build. So again, kind of frees up one or more equipment slots depending on what you're looking at. Burden of Shadows being a staff here. Staves aren't very good to begin with, so that's another thing to consider. Likewise, Grace of the Goddess, if you're using a Wisp build, or if you're using Wisp in your build, this is like 40-something% more damage, or maybe it's around a third more damage. It's pretty high, all things considered, along with, higher hit rate type things. So again, the base Grace of the Goddess only has +1 to each of these, so it's twice as good. Now the weapon is pretty decent itself as well, with physical gain as elemental. So you don't have that aspect, of course, but again, just pretty good to have that in addition to your actual weapon stats. Widow Hail, this was actually nerfed from 100% in the reveal down to 75%. But again, usually, like say you're playing Toxic Rain or something, 75% of a quiver, of your endgame quiver, even in solo Southbound, where you have like life, 20-25% attack speed, damage over time multiplier, increased damage with bow skills. Yeah, 75% of that is well worth 1/4 or 1/3 of your Ascendancy, depending on how you look at it. And then, obviously, there's some other, again, more minor stuff to consider here. But my main point here, before I run on too long, because you know me, I can talk forever, try to keep this one under 20 minutes. My point here being is this Ascendancy is likely to be better in trade disproportionately than solo Southbound. But if you are an endgame type of player in solo Southbound, I think the strength of this class really shines when you can get a good kit of items online for a particular build that's going to benefit from slots being freed up by these various uniques on offer. Or a build that, like with the Widow Hail example, is going to have a strong item in a slot that can then be enhanced by one of these effects. Now, that's not to say, again, that there aren't going to be any good builds that you could start with Reliquarian. Because like I said, I think the Pyroclast Mine thing is probably going to be pretty decent. Like, it's a decent skill overall. And getting +2 to all your auras and your main skill and some reservation efficiency, again, is pretty good. There are some other decent defensive options here as well. But overall, I would say that I'm not a huge fan of starting with this class because I think you need a pretty specific build to get full effect out of Reliquarian if you aren't doing some kind of endgame build. And again, the slower ramp up. When I'm playing my first character, it's going to be my slowest time through the campaign. I want it to be as smooth as possible, and I really want to front load as much power as I can during the leveling process. You know, playing something like Slams, you have your Ascendancy enable much higher uptime on your Warcries if you're playing Berserker, or just a generally good class if you're playing like Slayer or something. So yeah, in that sense, I'm not a huge fan of starting as Reliquarian, but instead I will likely be looking to it as a second or third character of the league in order to leverage some items that I may or may not end up finding or crafting throughout the league. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know down in the comments. And if you already have your starter on this Tuesday, 3 days before the league, I know I definitely don't, then let us know down in the comments what you're thinking of. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Peace.